In this segment, we're going to talk about the deployment process. And deployment has actually changed quite radically in the last decade or so. Just very quickly, the goal of deployment is to create some kind of a systematic, reliable process for making all the features that your individual developers are building on their own separate machines available to consumers, users, customers, stakeholders that want the system. With web apps, this is sort of just pushing to the live server all of the stuff that you've been building locally. With app stores, it's going through the approval process for whichever store it is to release your application. And with desktop apps, often you are just selling directly to customers who typically will do some sort of installation or update on their own. And this process is something that has been for a long time not really all that systematic. It's only in the last 10 years or so that people have started building into this process reliable, repeatable, systematic features that allow developers to do this in a little bit more sane fashion. So it's worth talking a little bit about the development environment first, because the development environment is essentially the thing you're starting with. All developers are going to have some kind of system for developing software. In organized environments, there's some sort of push to make sure that developers have a similar, if not identical, environment for development to all of the other developers on the team. And past the development environment, before you even get to production, there are also in between intermediate environments that you may deploy to. One of which would be like a staging environment. This would be sort of like a common deployed version of the software so that all of the development team can test new features in a somewhat less controlled fashion than their own desktop. Then you would have a stable environment. This is sort of a production candidate made available for testing prior to actually pushing to customers. So it's intended to be not a place to test brand new features, but more a place to test for reliability and some of the stuff that you're expecting consumers to be doing with the software, stress testing the system. And then finally, you have the production environment, which is really the last of these, the system actually as it is made available to consumers. And this is mostly a web app focused process, but there are parallels to other environments, mobile development, desktop development, that sort of thing. Deployment can be challenging, and this is just a short list of a few of the challenges that you might run into during deployment. The first is dependency management, and this is something that many developers face even when they're setting up their development environments. How do you make sure that all the frameworks and libraries that the developers are using are actually the same as the ones that all the other developers are using, or the same as the ones that would be used in production environments, staging environments, stable environments, and so on? Updates. How do you make sure that you can update the software and leave it in a known good state? This is particularly challenging for desktop software where the user is really in charge of the update process. How do you handle older versions of the software? So if you're trying to update from a version that's 2 or 3 releases ago, is there a way to catch that version up prior to doing the final push of your update? Now, both of those, the updates and older versions, are much more challenging in a desktop environment than they are in an app store or web-based environment. And then finally, an uninstall process. If the customer wants to leave your system or uninstall the application, how do they do so in a way that leaves their system in a known good state? All of this is something that a developer would have to be aware of and would have to focus on as a part of the deployment process. You really can't do this without having a systematic process for deploying software. All right, DevOps. So this is sort of like the new change in deployment that makes it more systematic, more reliable, and repeatable. And it's a much larger topic than we're going to be able to cover in class. The textbook really does not get into this very much at all. But it is actually, I think, becoming a critical element for most software organizations to have a team that is exclusively dedicated to both development and operations for the purpose of making this stuff systematic, reliable, repeatable, and supporting automation in each of these phases, the last several phases we've been talking about: testing, deployment, and maintenance. This is also starting to be integrated into the security process, or security professionals are starting to enter into this, and sometimes this is referred to as DevSecOps. And I think that's a good thing. You really want to have security folks, especially involved late in the process where you begin testing and deploying and maintaining the software. A strong DevOps engineer is going to be really crucial for ensuring that your developers can do some kind of a continuous implementation or continuous delivery process using version control systems. And essentially, this is a process where you can build and run all the tests for the system, then automatically provide feedback for problems to the consumers, to the developers who need to begin doing the correction stuff. And then also, once you have a build of the system that passes enough of the tests you care about, deploy that build to production. If you are interested in this topic, please send me an email, get in touch, come to the office hours, and we'll talk about some of the other resources that you might look into. But I'm not going to emphasize too much this concept in the final exam or in the project for this class.